Well, thank you so much for staying with us. Now, a new report says there is ample evidence that jihadi fighters from the Sahel region have crossed into Nigeria through the Benin Republic border. Well, the report is it's a Dutch think tank report titled Dangerous Liaisons that says the risk of extreme violence along the border between northern Benin and Nigeria are there, and it was done an extensive research done in the Sahel. It says jihadi fighters who had long operated in Africa's volatile Sahel region have settled in northwestern Nigeria after crossing from the neighboring Benin. And that report on Wednesday said the last trend in the militants' movement to wealthier West African nations is what has just happened, and how troubling is it? You may want to get more details of that in this conversation with Pastor Ladi Thompson, who is a security consultant and has actually been on this kind of conversation for a while. Thank you for joining us this morning, Pastor Thompson.
The pleasure is always mine.
And Dr. Oyewole Ogine is a senior researcher at Bonn International Center for Conflict Studies. He also joins us virtually. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Pastor Thompson, let me begin with you. Have we made any progress, or this is like we're getting closer?
Well, it will be tough to say we haven't made any progress at all. But if we're talking about substantial progress, there's a lot of room for improvement when we consider the weight of the existential threats that the country is facing. I don't think the responses so far match the gravity, or shall we say the gravitas, of the threats we are facing. For example, we are talking about the news report. Those news reports are not really saying anything new. These movements have been happening for a while. There's a massing that's going on. If you remember in, was it 2019, when General Obasanjo made a statement that people thought was provocative when he talked about the West African federalization and the African Islamization. I believe that his statement at that time was also prompted by movement of troops, even though it was not necessarily the Boko Haram, as it were. So what I'm trying to point out now is that by last year, all over the world, everybody had known that the center of gravity of the IS, the Islamic State, is different versions, which you know is a global franchise, had moved away from the Middle East to Africa. I mean, some movement went to South Asia.
Well, you know, the question then, my apologies, Pastor Thompson, for butting in. The question then would be, why? I'm asking this because it's a trend that was coming. Africa was not unaware of it. We always knew that this was going to come. And we knew that it's our people who are always going to be at the end of the effect. So isn't there anything that could have been done collaboratively among African nations and even individually by African countries?
Well, this is the time when Nigeria needs to think carefully. We are actually the giant of Africa. If there's any country that should be able to understand this threat and lead the way in helping other African nations to survive, it should be Nigeria, if there's any country at all. So the challenge we have here now is this. We are dealing, like I like to say over and over again, with a hydra that was cleverly designed, first of all, in its earlier years to evade detection. And even when you finally locate the fact that there's a new war form within your nation, you may not be able to track the Hydra's multi-head strategy. So the truth right now is that Nigeria remains the hope of Africa, because we are dealing with a very intelligent adversary that has a vision, has a plan, is pursuing it. It is extremely opportunistic. It understands Nigeria's history. It has statistics of Nigeria's armed forces. It understands the makeup of the political fronts for Nigeria, and it exploits everything. In fact, let me say this to you. This is a threat that normally collapses nations from within. So, back to what you were saying, yes, of a truth, Nigeria needs to wake up and rise to its stature, because it is not just a Nigerian threat, it's a global, I've told us many times, it's a global issue. We see the local face, but it's a global intelligence. I don't want us to forget that the franchise, the globalization of terrorism was perfected between 1990 and 1996. Next door to us here in Sudan. So there's nothing new we are saying other than the fact that we need to put on our thinking caps and get ready to handle this thing with what it needs.
Okay. Let me bring in Dr. Guinea. Now, Dr. Guinea, it's something that you have also thought about, worked on for a bit. What is troubling in this is, we always have these security reports. We are not unaware that these things were going to happen. And being an international threat, we always attend AU meetings, we attend UN meetings. All these things are always there. The trajectories are always predicted. It would seem like African nations, particularly Nigeria, tend to just open ourselves to these threats, almost like saying, we welcome you, by not doing anything or not doing enough to ensure that these things don't happen.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I just want to start from the first question, which you asked the Reverend. Yeah, the aspect of religion, or as you said, is actually the element of vulnerability that actually prey on by the vulnerable population, which are looking for something to leverage. So, if we look at it specifically, we will understand that where insurgency is happening across the Sahel region, I will just stick to Sahel region and then I'll move down to Nigeria. You will realize that this place, they have limited state services. In fact, if you go to the border side, you realize that the local population there, their level of citizenship is sometimes in jeopardy, in the sense that they are most likely to be loyal to whoever provides their daily needs. So I will just leave that onto that. Then when you check the level of the influx of armed flow in this area, you get to understand from drug trafficking down to different ammunition and production of locally made arms. Then you begin to see that there is also a recipe for this establishment of insurgency to happen without problem. So then the third point I want to mention, we really need to look at what is happening right now in the Western Sahel. And when we look at what is happening in the Western Sahel with the U.S. leaving the stage, and as well as the increased militarization and forceful use of the civilian to fight the war, for example, in Burkina Faso, and then the international conglomeration, saturation of different actors getting to Niger right now, you get to see that when you look at that border towards the Benin axis, the Kanji Dam, you begin to see that there will always be a problem. So, for example, you can see that recently Turkey was accused of, sponsoring the Syria fighter who are on a payroll of $1,500 monthly to fight in Niger. What is the interest of Turkey? To protect, for example, the mining sector, but that's just the idea. those whose family, maybe encounter some death or others, the compensation is range from $30,000 to $60,000. So when you look at this and you look at the Syria fighter, where they've been and how Turkey is also trying to establish its hegemony, you realize that Niger is not far from us. When you look at the Lake Chad Basin, where we have the multinational joint task force, where Nigeria is also embedded, the sector 4 is that of Niger. You realize that we have some commonality in security operation. Then we have the external one who also established itself bilaterally with this country. So as this intensifies, you begin to realize that, for example, places like Lake Togoma, the triangle between Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, which is also very saturated right now, there is always a push from these axes towards Benin axis. And then when you look at the whole thing, you will realize that there is enough reason to witness influx of insurgents in north central and in northwest Nigeria. Maybe we'll go deeper into that. So when you look at our local area, you also have to understand that in this border area, there are also the aspect of who the local people listen to and who come to their rescue when they experience challenge. Look at Ansarudi. Ansarudi in the north central has been operating for a while. In fact, Ansarudi was fighting bandits and telling the local people, look, we will protect you. If we protect you against the bandits, so far our interest is not politics, we are not into politics, and they rationalize the corruption in the system and others to bring more people, So when you look at this, you get to know that the hard security will not be enough to tackle this issue. Maybe I can stop here. Thank you.
One of the questions that's come to me right now on this matter, I just noted it. And so let me begin with you, Dr. Ogene. We've had, and I'm sure you are also aware, you've seen these stories on all kinds of platforms. I talk about Western influence, allegations of Western influence, and the fact that somehow we open ourselves to these things simply by not doing some things that we need to do. The influence of the West. I mean, Europe is also a multinational bloc, so to speak, but each nation maintains its independence. Each nation does the things that they're supposed to do. We've even seen situations where in Europe there is an area, maybe like even just one building, right, that has 3 countries, one building. I mean, these things they're there in the West. In Africa, and they even have a common currency. That's how much they were able to put themselves together. Africa is a continent like that, and so I'm not sure if we have been able to identify our divisive tendencies and our fault lines as a continent. I know we have it internally. We'll talk about that one, but as a continent, I don't know if we have been able to identify our commonality to be able to ward off the Western influences so that we can all see ourselves as one enough to be able to ward off this extreme violence, the risk of extreme violent extremism.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, you made 2 important points here. The first one is the external influence. Then the second one is how we deal with each other, how we identify our commonalities. What is interesting is armed groups such as Boko Haram, Islamic State of West Africa, and ITM and others, they recognize this commonality more than the states. And that is the reason why in June last year, you can see that ISWAP went to Mali to train the jihadists there on the use of explosives. That is to explain to you how translocal and transborder this armed group operate. Another interesting part is in the group, you don't mention nationality, but you mention common ground. I was in the field in the past 12 months moving around. I was in the border area whereby I don't need a visa to pass through, but the security will stop me for 3 hours because I refuse to pay. In some of the research we carry out, which are currently coming up, we have the participants where they prefer to pass across the border. What is interesting is some prefer to pass armed group control area because they will only pay one fee. So think of a driver who earned close to 60,000 a day between Nigeria and Niger, and who explained that at the end of the day, he will only return home with 10,000 because he had to settle from the border side down to the other border side. So this is just an example, for example, of even though the mobility on the paper is working, but the instrument to make it work is a bit problematic. So this is one point. With respect to the external influence, we have to dissect this in two ways. Who are these actors? Is there really Western, and how? The US policy is different from Germany policy. The French policy is different from Sweden policy. Each of them have these dynamics that we really need to dissect differently. For example, we cannot say, despite the fact that French has left the day, Germany completely is not off there. Germany is not completely off in Niger. So, and when you look at it again, when this actor left, then Russia came in. Iran is currently in Niger. So when you look at this actor coming up, the Saudi Arabia is trying to establish its hegemon. The United Arab Emirates is also doing the same in this area. So when you look at them, it's about the national actors, how they receive this, how they actually, shape this interaction for the benefit of the local people. So if I want to get to Russia, what exactly do I need with Russia? Do I need to outsource my security, such as Burkina Faso, where the presidency is actually supported and guarded by the elite Russian military? So what does it mean for a country like Burkina Faso, for example, to have a Russia to actually protect its presidency? So it means all the security apparatus of the country is already outsourced to Russia. So even if the partnership ends, then you know that we are vulnerable. So this is the instances of how the local actors really need to get it right before blaming it on the external actor. So this one point is important for us to underline, and that is why Niger today is not still on good time with ECOWAS, even though what he considers is doing is dangerous even for the region itself. Consider Mauritania. Mauritania is also a very dangerous zone, which has not been spoken of. Most of the armed group, they stay in Mauritania and they attack in Mali. So in the recent time, maybe you could study how Mali and the Mauritanian government are beginning to, have exchanges, because the Mali continue to push this armed group, and the Mauritanian government will say, look, you are actually killing our citizens without cause. So there is a whole lot of things. And when you look at Mauritania still has the support of France. So this is how this plays out, and it's important for us to reflect whether ECOWAS security apparatus on small arm, on good governance really work, and why it's not working.
Yeah,
so
Dr. Guinea,
really
Dr. Guinea, perhaps the issue really is we haven't even explored our own independence. Okay, maybe we have a semblance of independence, but we have not even really. Let me ask Pastor Thompson. I'm speaking to this same issue of the Western influence and all of that. I'm sure you listened to everything that Dr. Guinea said. I'm just wondering whether we have even embraced our own unique identities as individual nations, and then see the commonalities, as a continent, to be able to ward off all these influences. Because unless we even come to terms with that, I don't even know if this thing is ever going to end.
Okay, a very good presentation made by the Dr. Guinea. But we need to take a bigger look right now to know why Nigeria's position is very important in this whole deal. Now, let's take it to a higher level, the highest level. What really is going on? What is going on is that there's a clash of ideas as to what the new world order will be. For all the scholars and those who have interrogated developments all over the world after the Cold War, after the Cold War literally ended, everybody knew that sooner or later, a new world order has to be established. A new world order is just a set of ideas of how the world should be run. And of course, that also contains a roadmap, that will be put into place, which affects the foreign policy of different nations. Now, let's make this very clear. All the Western nations of the world have some things in common. Okay? So they have a common definition of the future they have for the globe. The Chinese are making a play. Russia is still standing up to and saying, look, we're still in the picture. Now, the interesting thing is that it's also the Middle East that may be the surprise, in this new frontiers to dictate the world order. And what has happened is that from the Middle East, their major play has been to restructure the globe using a supremacist agenda that is so well put together. Of course, we can, granulate this into little bits, but so that we can gain understanding and bring it home so that we can wake up in Nigeria. Now, ever since, for instance, I mentioned how America pulled out of Afghanistan, they recognized the direction of the wind. Now, in those days until now, there's something called the incentivization of terrorists with territories. You are going to be shocked at the highest levels of governance in this world, the level of back and forth that goes on. Unfortunately for Africa, Africa is yet to establish any coherent voice that can contribute to the new world order that the whole globe is trying to establish.
Now, that is important, Pastor
the sparks are flying.
Pastor Thompson, that is very, very important. Now, the world, everyone in this club that you have talked about, they recognize that Africa is it. Without Africa, there will be no world order, so to speak. Now, they all recognize the important place of Africa. They recognize the importance of certain specific countries on this continent, Nigeria being one of them, South Africa being one of them, and a number of others even in North Africa. So what is the inhibition for Africa to come to terms with these issues that you are raising and then be able to have one front? Are they do they have moles within themselves, or is Africa, chained by its own challenges of poverty and underdevelopment?
Well, the clue to the answer of that is in the history of the African, or the quote, black race. The truth about this is, first of all, let me say this to you. All these tussles you are seeing going on, a major part of it is all about finances, economy, and the wealth of Africa. Now, don't forget that Africa, all African nations put together for the past few decades, have contributed less than 3% of the global GDP. Our share of global trade is equally dismal. Now, the point is this. What has happened to us is that the African mind, we have been put into a place where we do not have the ability, or we have not manifested the ability to mathematize inquiry. So there are complex equations that govern global economics and things like that. And since the raw material and a lot of what Africa has is useful to keeping the entire globe running, you'll find out that until Africa realizes this, and this is where Nigeria comes in and its role in the African Union. And I think the African Union has been making some progress, especially when it's included the AU 6 regional. But for us to get it right, let me bring you something simple. If you want to stop this movement of troops coming into Nigeria, hoping that we are going to be the raw material with which they will launch their own global ambitions, I'll give you one simple deal, for instance. If Nigeria spearheaded a move in the African Union to move everybody away from celebrating independence year in, year out, to establish interdependence at the global level as the African contribution to the world future. Now, what does interdependence, what will it bring? What Africa is saying is that, listen, all these clever tricks you people are playing, you say we are emotive, we say we are intuitive, you say we are unscientific, you say that we are incapable of critical thought. You treat us like the village idiot. In fact, if you research properly, you find out that we are just being tolerated on the globe. Now, our paradise is turned into a hell because we don't understand how to bring furniture out of a tree. Now, the reason why these things are working like that is because there are programs that have been inserted in Africa. Now, the understanding of programs is this. no matter how good a leadership is, until a country discovers the secret of programming, which nobody teaches in any university, we are going to find that African nations will continue to be divided. African nations will continue to flounder. We will continue to feel inferior. We will continue to be incapable of, developing our own resources to the point where we earn a seat at the table of equals at the global level.
Pastor Thompson, my apologies.
Wake up and look at the big picture.
My apologies, Pastor Thompson. Yeah, Pastor Thompson, you see, maybe I'm trivializing a little too much. But we both know that Africa understands maybe Africans understand programming. Whether we scale it higher is another conversation altogether. Let me ask Dr. Ogine if he agrees with you in terms of programming. Because what I understand by programming, and I think I understand the grand scheme of what Pastor Thompson is talking about. Because when you train a child, for instance, you tell a child to behave in a particular way. And that's why, there are certain codes that certain cultures in Nigeria just happen to have. That's the way I understand this program, and I hope it is maybe just a microcosm of what Pastor Thompson is talking about. So what I'm saying is I believe that Africa has the capacity to program, whether or not we do it, whether or not we understand it enough to scale it higher and re-engineer ourselves away from the previous programming of colonial days until now. That's another conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very important point. There are 2 points you made here. Is the aspect of governance, which is one, and the second point has to do with how we do things. With respect to governance, we all know that most African countries operate hybrid governance. The hybrid order which we operate is completely not in sync with the Western failure of how governance should establish. We need to recognize it and see how such hybrid order, I'm going there right now, how can we leverage that more concretely to really bring out the best in us? So what is hybrid order in this sense? The hybridity is we have the traditional system which is embedded with our modern system of governance, and in that capacity, we are trying to see how we can strike the balance and how we can make things work. For example, you have the traditional ruler and you have the local government. For me, there are two parallel programs. There are two parallel governments. The traditional ruler, maybe they are ceremonial or whatever, but they perform the role of governance, especially in the places where crises happen. Where crises happen, the traditional institution, they participate as a judiciary, legislative, and also as a lawmaker, I would say. So when you look at those instances, because I want to go down to the local level now, when you look at those instances when crises happen, the traditional ruler resolves it. We have instances when a woman was raped and they said the solution to that is just to marry her the first. Of course, nobody will talk about it, which is also very barbaric practice. But because this modern system, which we practice, and the traditional system, we allow them to work together, and they also work against each other. So maybe there are areas of advantage when we have that. Then how do we really build up from what we have and to match up with the global demand? Because right now, we are talking about Nigeria as a giant of Africa. You have to talk about our security situation. How can we contain our security? How can we bring investors? How can we make our education work? Why do we have to cut up our vocational training and emphasize too much of the university degree? So as a result of that, we do not have a lot of people who finish from the university and employable. So when you go to the area where conflicts happen, surprisingly, you will see people have passed through university and they speak eloquently and they will tell you, we know this place, we know this area. So that is why when you go to the HAM group, you will see that you will see a lot of intelligent young men and women who are actually engaging in different structural mechanics to repair the cars of the HAM group, they have agricultural economy. So you will see this organization somehow, especially that of ISWAP. So when you begin to see that and you see where we are today, we need to reflect. What have we gone wrong? Yes, maybe the citizen is not benefiting enough, true, but there are also instances. For example, when we get our election period, we know how tense it is. We use election period to scatter all the peace-building activities that we've already built over the years. And after election period, we want to start again and build the United Nations. So there are quite a lot of things that we need to factor in that contribute to insurgency, that contribute to Nigeria not having a standard order. As you see, South Africa is positioning itself in all this area. South Africa is not, shying away from being part of the BRICS. We do not belong to any. Maybe it has advantage or disadvantage. This is things that we really also need to reflect on. But more importantly is when Nigeria considers itself as a giant and is not investing in understanding the dynamics surrounding its constituency, there's a problem. And that's why it is not only just when a report comes out from somewhere, that's when Nigeria is supposed to know what is going on around it. Nigeria needs to be embedded because Nigeria invested a lot in these territories and really need to also think of its economic interest. So this is how I think I can answer. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let me come back to you, Pastor Thompson. You may want to add a word or two to what Dr. Guinea has said, but was I a little too simplistic in my perspective of the programming? Because I mean, I think the biggest questions usually start from the basics, right?
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. What I'll do is that while I answer the question, I will ask you a question and then see if you can get us the answer. Then while I'm answering the question, now, if you borrowed 50 naira from your friend and borrowed, let's say your mother, you borrowed 50 naira from her, borrowed 50 naira. Annual budget of an airport, I think in Georgia, in the United States, and the annual budget of Nigeria, for many years were exactly the same. So it got me thinking, how is the annual budget of an airport equal to the annual budget of a country where, I mean, today we are 220 million plus people? Then it dawned on me that, look, there's a game being played here. We need a fresh vision, effective communication. And because of effective communication, there will be discipline. Forget about religion now, because religion is tearing the country apart.
Which is actually supposed to be some kind of instrument of balance itself. Well, that's a very instructive one. I'm not sure it's even performing that purpose right now. Dr. Guinea, do you agree with Pastor Thompson? Because, again, forgive me, in that movie that I saw yesterday, Olufimile Ransom Kuti, the colonial master in the movie said, look, we're not just having a problem with this woman, Funmilayo Ransom Kuti. We're also having the same problem with Margaret Ekpo in Calabar at about the same time. So they were able to mobilize the locals. Pastor Thompson says the sophistication of the challenges and the solutions of those days are way more complex than today. But I believe that every generation has its own peculiarities, right?
Yes, I thank you for that. I think what's important about, I think I agree with what Reverend said. What is very important here is we need to look at the personality of this individual and their yearnings. If you look at it, it resonated with the local yearnings. And at that level, it's easy for them to really, push. But when you look at the current situation where we have, where the political actors does not represent, they do not at all represent the yearnings of the local people, you know that there's no communication that will happen that will really touch the ground. Now, the structure itself is dysfunctional. When you look at the top-down structure where the senator, the governor, only communicate to the people whenever there's a campaign, or they communicate to them in such a way that you are the poor guys, we want to help you. And not from the sense that I hold the responsibility to do this, and if I don't do that, I can be held accountable. That is one point. The second point on the structure is look at the local governance today. The local governance is dead. So, and when you're talking about border communities where the conflicts are happening, you have to talk about local governance. The security subject is a subject of governance, is subject of the National Assembly, is subject of the federal status. But the point is, any discussion about the structuring of the situation to address this challenge exclude local governance. Our local government is dead. And this is the closest to the people in the modern democratic sense. So if these local governance are appendage, are dependent of the governance, I'm aware of the current Supreme Court issue. But this is the point. The local government need to work and they need to be able to develop the local communities. That is where the presence of the state can be felt at this distant area. And without that, they will remain vulnerable to unknown government, they will remain vulnerable to recruitment, and they will continue to do that. No military intervention will solve it. No policing will solve it. Communication can only be done when there's a cynic of idea between the leaders and the left. And that can only happen when we bring this down to the local, and when we recognize that power belongs to the people, and when we don't just rationalize them and try to make them only look important when we need their attention.
Okay.
This is the point.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oyewole Ogini. It's definitely an ongoing conversation. I just want to believe for the life of me that everyone who needs to take a thing or two have taken them from this conversation. Dr. Oyewole Ogini is a senior researcher at Bonn International Center for Conflict Studies. He joins us along with Pastor Ladi Thompson, who is a security consultant and joined us from London. Thank you so much. Truly appreciate your time, gentlemen. It's interesting that the two gentlemen that spoke about this conversation didn't even mention the security operatives. They just talked about governments of the various countries, right? And in Nigeria, no less. Especially at the time when the internal security is supposed to be championed by the police. But guess what? The police and the Police Service Commission tend to be at some kind of, I don't even know what word to use. I didn't say loggerheads. I didn't say it. You said it. I didn't say it. But what all of that is about, let's have that conversation when we return from this break. Stay with us.